The breakthroughs in science, particularly in medical science and specifically cancer research science, are just incredible. And you can see that we're on the cusp of so much more.
Welcome to Believe in Progress, the American Association for Cancer Research Foundation podcast. Join us and be inspired by the incredible stories of those who have faced cancer with strength and resilience, and the medical professionals who are working tirelessly to find new treatments and ultimately a cure. Believe in Progress isn't just about the science of cancer. It's about the human side of this disease. Together, we can make progress in the fight against cancer and bring hope to those who need it most. What if the same strategic thinking used to reshape billion-dollar companies could be applied to reimagining how we fund cancer research, accelerate innovation, and expand access to life-saving care? On today's episode of Believe in Progress, we speak with Larry Kanarek, a retired senior partner from McKinsey Company, whose career spanned over 3 decades. Larry helped some of the world's largest companies reshape their futures, and now he's using that experience to accelerate education and cancer research. From the boardroom to the philanthropic front lines, Larry brings a unique lens on what real progress looks like. Larry, so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, Mitch.
So, Larry, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and how you got involved with McKinsey, and what was your interest to get into consulting?
Well, like a lot of things in life, Mitch, it was pretty accidental. When I went to college, my brother-in-law, or my soon-to-be brother-in-law, had gone to the same school and majored in economics. That sounded interesting to me. So I took a couple of courses in economics and just loved it. So I wound up majoring in economics. And my brother-in-law wound up going to business school after college. And that sounded like an interesting idea to me. But when I applied to business school, they had just introduced a program where many of the schools would accept you, but you'd have to work for a couple of years first. And so that's what I wound up doing. And I called up the business school and said, "Do you have any ideas?" And they gave me the name of a couple of consulting firms, one of which was a company still around and doing well called Bain and Company.
Course.
And I wound up working there for 2 years as a business analyst, and I just loved it. I just loved the idea of working in teams to solve complex problems, of helping others, which were our clients, of developing people within your own organization. It just seemed wonderful to me. So I went off to business school, and in the summer, I decided, let me try something else. So I tried investment banking, which is a fabulously interesting space, but I just didn't like it. It wasn't for me. So I decided, let me go back to consulting. It worked so well. I wound up considering Bain or McKinsey. And I picked McKinsey in part because at the time, it was just a much bigger player. It played on a bigger world stage. It had presence in more locations around the world. And so that's where I went. And, there's this old joke about consulting that people wind up doing it for 2 years. Well, I did it for 34. Consulting firms are famous for what's called the up or out policy, which means you either perform well or you leave. And of course, many people don't have to be asked to leave. They discover this really isn't for them. But it was for me. And so maybe I did 17 2-year terms. I had a mentor who once said to me, when I said, "Why did you stay at McKinsey?" And he said, "You mean, why do I continue to put off my decision to leave?"
Right.
And that's what I did. I put off my decision to leave for 34 years, and I'm glad that I did.
When you were at McKinsey, you did lots of corporate advice and corporate counseling with leaders. And I wonder if you could tell the audience a little bit about the Tyco story and how you helped that organization out.
Sure. The Tyco story is a very interesting. Most people probably aren't aware of it, even though when we worked with them, they were a $40 billion corporation. But they were heavily involved in a lot of commercial businesses. And most of us pay attention to more of the retail world, retail meaning things like Apple Computer, TJ Maxx, and Amazon, and so forth. But in the 90s, Tyco was put together by a CEO named Dennis Kozlowski. And Dennis had kind of a financial play in mind where he would make tons of acquisitions in spaces that he considered somewhat related to the businesses he already had. Although that turned out to be perhaps less true than he thought. And the idea was he had some very highly appreciated stock. The Tyco stock did very well. So if you buy a company with very highly priced stock, you're buying it pretty cheap in a way. And so he would buy these companies and put them together with his other businesses, but he didn't really do anything with them. They all kind of ran independently. And then you start scratching your head and saying, well, what really is the idea here to really create benefit or value? Anyhow, it turned out there wasn't one. It turned out there were also a bunch of accounting irregularities. And having amassed the $40 billion business, Dennis Kozlowski was indicted and went off to jail for about 11 years. A guy named Ed Breen was brought in by that board. Ed decided to accept the job. At the time, he was the number 2 guy at a company called Motorola. And he accepted the job under one condition, and that's the entire board resign. And the board did. And so Ed brought in his own board, and they really spent 2 years just trying to save the company. You can imagine how many lawsuits there were against this company from shareholders, from the companies that they had bought, and now the value of that had gone down. But he managed to do it. He saved the company. And after taking a deep breath, his question was, okay, we've saved this. What do we do with this? And so we were brought in. We had a very large team of about 30 people working on this. Our recommendation eventually was to start breaking up the company. It never made sense to put it together. And we developed a set of criteria under which you would keep businesses together. They had to pass a certain set of tests. And not many of their businesses really did. And so working with them closely, we wound up breaking the company into 3 pieces. And 2 of them, therefore, were spun off as separate entities. One became the healthcare company, Covidien.
Right.
Covidien eventually bought Mallinckrodt, but then also was absorbed by Medtronic. And, you can see in even that what the thinking is here. So Covidien had a bunch of good healthcare businesses. They were kind of hampered by being part of a company that also owned a lot of flow control businesses that regulated the flow of water, that regulated the flow of oil. What do these 2 things have in common? Almost nothing. But freed of that, well, they could start doing things that made more sense. They invested a lot more in R&D. They brought in talent that wouldn't join Tyco because Tyco's not a healthcare company, but Covidien was. They made some acquisitions, and they were eventually bought by Medtronic. And in that process, tens of thousands of jobs were saved or created. A lot of shareholder value was created for investors. And the same thing happened in the other 2 parts. They broke up yet again, or they combined with other entities, or having been brought together as more focused businesses, they could focus on operations and improve just the way those businesses were run. They could attract more talent. And over 7 to 10 years, that played out. And it's just a great success story.
And when you're in your role as a consultant, are you working directly with Ed and many of his lieutenants to, counsel them and like giving them your honest thoughts about good idea, bad idea? Could you give us a couple examples of that?
Yeah, well, you work very closely with the CEO in that case, also with the CFO, because, when you're talking about the nature of the company and um, the value of the different pieces of the company and do they help each other create shareholder value, as we call it. The CFO plays a crucial role. They had an outstanding CFO named Chris Coughlin. And you work pretty closely with the heads of the businesses. They have to be brought into this. They have to know what's going on. They have a lot of information and perspective that is crucial. The people who are running the healthcare business can really help you understand the challenge of running a healthcare business while you're part of a business that also does flow control and home security equipment like ADT security.
Right.
And you also work with the board because ultimately this is going to be a board level decision. You have to understand what's on the mind of the board. You have to help come to a common point of view about how are we going to even evaluate this? Because if you can't agree on criteria by which you're going to evaluate this, it'll be very difficult to get to agreement on the other side of all the analysis that we do. One of the most interesting examples that I can think of was when we were just about done and we're bringing our recommendations to the board with the full support and approval of Ed Breen, the CEO. Halfway through our presentation, we could see that the board was a little restless. So we kind of just stopped the meeting and we said, what's on your mind? And what was on their mind was very interesting. These guys had been brought in about 2 to 3 years earlier as a brand new group, and they really had worked together with the CEO, with the CEO's team to save the company. And here it was 3 years later, and we were suggesting break it
Right.
up.
Right.
It's over. Thank you very much. You can go home now. And we talked that through. And by dealing with that issue, they got comfortable with the recommendation. And what they wound up doing is they became the board of one of the three companies that was broken up. So in a sense, they continued on with their work just in a piece of it while the other two pieces went about their own business. But, everybody thinks consulting is just about its analysis, strategic thinking, but there's a lot of human element into the way businesses are run and decisions are made.
Yeah, it sounds that way. It sounds like the board wanted to stay together as well. They sound like they
Exactly.
enjoyed their company. When you're on an assignment like that, are you working multiple assignments or are you focused just on that particular client?
Well, when you do an assignment like that, you really can't have more than a couple of three
Right.
clients. I mean, it really demands your attention, not just in terms of time, but in terms of
I see.
availability.
I see.
Things happen, problems get raised, events occur, and you have to be able to just be there on the spot. Um, the bulk of the team, as I said, I think we had about 30 people there. I'd say the bulk of the team is full time. They're devoted. This is what their life is going to be for the next 3, 6, 8 months, whatever it takes to get the job done. The senior people, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, do have one, maybe two other clients. But it's also clear when you're doing something like this, it's got to be your number one priority.
Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about cancer research, and perhaps you would tell the audience a little bit about your own cancer journey, if you would.
Towards the end of this wonderful experience with Tyco, it was September. And every September for the last 30 years, I'd gone and got my annual physical, like many people do. The way it works is I'd go in for my physical. I'd have a lovely chat with my doctor who I'd known for 30 years. We'd catch up on family, friends, work, you name it. He's trying to understand the context in which my health exists. He'd give me a physical exam. He'd take some blood work. I'd say, see you next year. And about 10 days later, a letter would arrive. That was his approach at my house that had the results of my blood tests and a 1 to 2 page letter from him talking about his interpretation, the results, the visit I'd had with him, and so forth. And it was usually a very innocuous kind of thing. I noticed you're up 3 pounds, but you're still exercising. Maybe you should watch your food. Your cholesterol was down, so I feel good about
Right.
that, and so forth. This one was a little different. This one said, your white blood cell count is a little high, and I didn't notice that you appeared sick. So I think what you should do is come back in 4 weeks and repeat it. So this was on a Friday. Of course, these things always arrive late on Friday, so you can't call the next day.
How many years ago was this, by the way?
This is now 12
12
years
years
ago,
ago.
September.
Okay.
So I called Dr. Google. Not something
Just what you're
doctors
supposed to
like to
do,
do.
right?
Exactly, just like they tell you to do.
Right.
Now you call Dr. ChatGPT.
That's right.
And what Google really said was if your white blood cell count is high, you either have an infection or you have leukemia. And I thought, how could that be true? How could it be one or the other? And by the way, I don't think I have an infection. So I sat there and I said, I think I have leukemia. So I did speak to my doctor the next week, and he said, well, that certainly is a possibility. That's what we want to retest. Anyhow, I retested it, and lo and behold, it's still high. So he sends me off to a hematologist who takes some blood work where they do a test, which they do for other cancers too, called flow cytometry. And it pretty much definitively tells you if you have leukemia, in my case, CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia.
How did that hit you?
It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had a 5-year-old at the time. And I had two thoughts that went through my mind. Number one is, how long am I going to be on this planet? And will I be here for her high school graduation?
Right.
By the way, she graduates next year. And so I'm hopeful the answer
That's
to
going to
that
happen,
is
man. I know it.
yes. Right, exactly. Thank you, Mitch. Um, But that is your reaction. And so I wound up going to a very well-renowned hematology oncologist at Georgetown Hospital, somewhat older person, but who had really been in the forefront of CLL over many years. And they run a whole battery of very sophisticated genetic tests. Today, they run more tests than they did back then. When the test came back, I went in to the appointment and he said, so I've got good news. All your markers are the best markers you can have, which meant that the genetic chromosomal mutation I had was the better one, which suggested a slow-growing indolent CLL. I have a certain type of mutation on what's called IGVH, which is mutated, which is what you want, which suggests also slow growing. A number of other markers all pointed to that. I was greatly relieved. And so my question to him was, when do you think I'll need treatment? And his answer was probably never. And you can imagine you walk out of that office just walking on air. 4.5 years later, I needed treatment. Which is a reminder that doctors are wonderful, but they don't know everything and they can't know everything. So I could see that my white blood cells were climbing. Some of the other markers that they look at, like your hemoglobin and your platelets, were coming down.
I hope you're enjoying today's episode. I wanted to take a quick moment to remind you that your support is vital in our fight against cancer. As we always say at the AACR, cancer research saves lives, but we cannot do that without the generous support of people like you. If you're moved by the stories and insights shared in our podcast, please consider making a donation to AACR by visiting aacr.org. Your contributions help fund essential research and provide support to those affected by cancer. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the Believe in Progress podcast. By subscribing and sharing with your friends and family, you help us reach more people with these important conversations. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to the episode. Were you being tested now like twice a year, once a year? More frequent testing, right?
You know, you're absolutely right. This oncologist suggested we test every 6 months because he was persuaded that this would be very slow growing. But after a year, it looked like it was moving a little quicker. And I started testing every 3 months. And I stayed with that every 3 months until we went to every 2 months. And, you know, in retrospect, you could plot my numbers on a graph and it would be a straight line upward. And so 4.5 years into this, he said, you're going to need some treatment.
As your numbers were going up, was it affecting your health?
You know, the strange thing was it didn't.
That's crazy.
And it's another example of you can never predict the course of these things. In fact, what the oncologist said to me was, as your hemoglobin drops, you're going to start feeling it. You're not going to have as much energy. And that didn't happen. And at one point I said to him, it's not happening. He said, well, when it drops below 12, you'll notice it. I showed up at 11. I felt fine. Maybe your body acclimates.
Right.
But I literally never felt it, even when my numbers got down to the low enough level where there's just no question you need to start treating.
And so what's the treatment?
You probably know, up until about then, the treatment was kind of a chemoimmunotherapy treatment, but it was a chemo treatment, and it was called FCR. But the alternative had just come about, what they called a novel drug, a drug called ibrutinib, a remarkable breakthrough that is a little different than chemotherapy. It's what they call a targeted drug. It's a lot more targeted on the cells you want to kill, and so it does less collateral damage the way chemotherapy does. And I was reading a fair bit about it. My approach was to read a lot. Some people's approach is not to read at all. I think you've got to find your own approach. But it looked like that for my cancer, my particular set of genetic and chromosomal mutations, this chemoimmunotherapy of FCR might still be the best treatment, and that there seemed to be an indication that a small subset of people with CLL could be cured with FCR. But my oncologist hated the idea of chemotherapy. He used to talk about, you know, first we would cut people, surgery, then we'd burn people, chemotherapy. Then we'd poison people, which is chemotherapy. Burn people was radiation. And he just hated it. And I appreciate that.
Of course.
So he thought we should do ibrutinib. And I said to him, look, I tend to follow what you think. I have a lot of respect for you. I'd love to get a second perspective. And I call it a second perspective rather than a second opinion, because I'm actually just looking to kind of hear another doctor and how they approach
Mm-hmm.
this. It's not just I would do X or
Mm-hmm.
Y. I do want to hear that, but I just want to hear how do they come at this? What's their view of CLL? Where is this
I love
going?
it. I love that idea, perspective.
So he totally agreed with that idea, and he referred me to a doctor named Dr. Mato, who at the time was at
Mm-hmm.
Penn. I went up there and I loved him. Engaging, youngish, 40 something, really engaged in a back and forth conversation the way I hadn't quite experienced. And we had a very interesting conversation about FCR versus ibrutinib. And he said it wasn't an obvious choice for me, which was very interesting. And it was almost like a personal choice. He laid out the pros, the cons, the benefits, etc., and actually printed out a couple of articles for me to take back on the train to Washington. And I read them, and I called him back. He also ran more tests, by the way.
Okay.
He was looking to see if there was some modern day genetic mutation that might explain why someone like me, who looked like I might never need treatment, in fact did, but didn't find anything. And, I called him back at some point and I said, I think I'm going to go with the ibrutinib, but I also would be interested in you being my oncologist going forward. And he said, well, look, let me put it this way. I'm about to move to Sloan Kettering and head their CLL practice. Give me a year to get settled. Start with the ibrutinib. You would do it with me anyhow. And keep me informed. So I started with the ibrutinib. It started working. My white blood cell count started coming down. Each visit, it was down about 50% every 3 months. A year later, I decided to get back in touch with Dr. Mato, paid him a visit at Sloan Kettering, and he told me about a clinical trial they had. And the clinical trial was designed to add 2 other drugs to ibrutinib for people who had taken ibrutinib for 6 months and for where it was
So it's
successful.
kind of like a combination therapy.
It was a combination triplet therapy, one infusion drug, another pill, and
Okay.
ibrutinib is a pill. So I went on this trial for 2 years. The hope was that I would become what they call MRD undetectable. As you know, that means they, in a very sophisticated blood test where they look at 500,000 of your white blood cells, they don't see cancer, or it's at such a minimal level that they declare it
Right.
undetectable. And he had hoped that within 6 months I'd become undetectable. And it turns out many people on the trial did. I did not. So another example of where you get very hopeful news, and yet it doesn't quite work out that way. Anyhow, after 2 years, the trial ended, and I was very, very low end of CLL, but not undetectable until I stopped taking the drugs. And when I stopped taking the drugs, my blood level fell to undetectable. And what it was that these drugs work in part by pushing out CLL from your spleen and from your lymph nodes and your bone marrow into your bloodstream so it can be killed. And it was constantly doing a little bit more, a little bit more. But I was MRD undetectable. And I have been pretty much cancer free. My blood test probably looks like your blood test and everybody else's blood test for 4 years now. Someday it will come back. And I periodically talk to my oncologist about what's the next line of treatment. But it's all left me very confident. This is 12 years ago now, and 4 years of no treatment is pretty exciting.
That's fantastic and great news, and congratulations on that. And there's new research going on. There's always new ideas, new therapies as well. I wonder if, God forbid, you had to go back on treatment, would it still be ibrutinib?
It would not. One of the reasons is I did have some side effects from ibrutinib. It was the first of these drugs, and the first drug often comes with some side effects, and the industry then works very hard to increase the efficacy of a similar drug and reduce the side effects. There have been a couple of others that have come out, acalabrutinib, zanubrutinib, that are much more frequently prescribed first line. But even then, I might not go back on those because they might still have similar side effects to the ones I experienced. So I'd probably go on what's called a BCL2 inhibitor, which is a drug called
Mhm.
venetoclax. And I'm hoping that's still a couple of years
Me
away.
too.
And my whole philosophy is that the drug discovery stays ahead of my cancer
Right.
progression.
Right. Well, that's what we do here. We try to make that happen. How did your family support you and react to all of this?
Well, it's very interesting. For about 5 years, I didn't tell them.
Was that because you just didn't want to scare them, or
Yeah, it just struck me that, of course, what I had heard initially was I may never need
right?
treatment. And so then you sit there and you say, so wait a minute, I've got something that's never going to need treatment, that's not going to affect me. What's the point of sharing this news? What do I expect people to do with it?
Right.
Um, well, anyhow, even as time went by and it seemed like I probably would need treatment at some point, you scratch your head and say, kind of the same thing. What's the point of saying to them, someday I'm going to need treatment? So I waited probably for a year into treatment. So now I'm 5, 6 years past diagnosis before I told them. And at the time, what I was able to tell them was a lot more than I could have told them at the beginning, including I've started taking a drug. It seems to be working very effectively. I'm going to enter a trial that has the prospects for being even more effective. So I'm extremely optimistic, and I could tell them that in a way that would come across in a very believable way. Everybody handles this in a different way. It's a very personal decision. I think you just have to reach into your heart and ask yourself, what feels right for me? What feels right for my family? And I still feel comfortable that this is the way I did
That's
it.
great. So one could say, Larry, that cancer research certainly has prolonged your life and kept you going. What are your own thoughts about the future of cancer research, cancer science, and what it is we're trying to accomplish here at the American Association for Cancer Research?
It's probably the most important field that exists today. It's exclamation point. It seems to me as a layman that for the last 10 plus years, building on lots of less productive work prior to that, but you always need some platform to stand on. The breakthroughs in science, particularly in medical science and specifically cancer research science, are just incredible. And you can see that we're on the cusp of so much more. The knowledge of how cancer cells live, how to attack them, our understanding of the microbiology and the microchemistry of it is so far advanced today. You can just look forward to a world where every 10 years it looks like a different generation. You think about it, you take something like breast cancer. I know somebody right now who was diagnosed with breast cancer. 50 years ago, that was close to a death sentence, right? 20 years ago, it was a rough sentence. Maybe you'd live, maybe the odds were in your favor, but maybe not. Today, the vast majority of people with it live. And someday, maybe everybody will live. And of course, someday beyond that, maybe we'll detect it before you notice something, a tumor. And the ability to treat it in that stage will be, even better. And so to me, this is perhaps the most important space in our society that exists today. And I think we should all do something, whatever that something is, to help support it.
I had the pleasure of reading a couple of your blogs, which is Contrarian. And I read one that really captured my heart, and that was the one that you wrote about your father, Sam, and also has a very soft spot for me in my heart because my grandson's name is Sam. I would love for you to chat a little bit about your dad and what he meant to you, because at least what I read from that beautiful blog about your father, he had quite an impact on your life.
Yeah, he did. As did my mom, by the way, in different ways. That's, I guess, that's why we're given two parents. My mother gave me optimism. That was her gift. My dad gave me a couple of really important gifts. One was hard work, and the other was discipline. And, if you get hard work and discipline from one group and optimism from another, you're a very thankful young man. I also remember the words my sister used to eulogize him, and I think we put on his gravestone. And it was something like, you always knew three things about dad. He always worried about you. he always cared for you, and he was always there for you.
Tell me a little more about Annette's optimism. I'm an optimistic person, and I love to learn about people like that.
I'll give you a very small example. We'd go to a restaurant that we made a reservation for at 6 o'clock. At the time, I was working very busy, so I was fitting in this dinner with mom. We show up and they say, your table's not quite ready yet. Okay, how long will it be? It'll be about a half an hour. And I say, what was the point of making a reservation? Right? I mean, isn't that what a reservation is for? And you say, yeah, we appreciate that, but we're sorry. It's just that we probably overbooked. So anyhow, I'm getting annoyed. And my mom turns to me and she says, Lawrence, which is what she sometimes called me, Lawrence, we'll go to the bar. We'll order a drink. We'll sit. We'll be comfortable. We'll talk. And they'll call our name before we know it. And it's just a magical way of looking at so many problems. I realize a restaurant reservation wasn't a very big
No,
issue,
correct.
but she took that approach to everything in life. So she lived an optimistic life. She had this great phrase, every day you open your eyes is a beautiful day.
Love it.
But she also instructed me on optimism. And you think, well, how do you instruct people on optimism? We would be talking about some issue, and she might hear a little pessimism creep into my voice. And she would say, in the most loving way possible, don't be a pessimist like your father. And she wasn't being
Right.
critical of my father. She loved him till the end of the
Right.
earth, but she also understood him. And he was a pessimist. And she would say, don't be a pessimist like your father. And of course, the impact that had on me was I realized he was a pessimist. And I could see that that didn't really accomplish anything. In fact, quite the opposite. So the instruction from her helped, and the way she lived life helped. And so optimism, hard work, discipline.
Love
Wow.
it. I love it. And I love what you all did to honor your dad and what's on his, his gravesite there. It's very
Yeah.
special, very special stuff.
Thank you.
Early in our conversation, you briefly mentioned about Chat GPT, and I'm just kind of curious your thoughts about artificial intelligence and how that's going to relate to the future of cancer research, because I certainly am seeing it in my day-to-day work here at AACR, but just wondering what your perceptions are.
Yeah, well, I'd love to learn more about this. And in a way, I'm very sorry I'm not still working at McKinsey, because without a doubt, AI has become a huge part of the business. At one level, it's probably a real threat to consultants because AI now can put a lot of information and thinking on the table that consultants used to get paid to do. On the other hand, there's all these corporations out there, including in the health field, that have to figure out how to harness AI, how to really make it work to their advantage and to out hustle the competition. And that'd be very exciting. And I did a fair bit of healthcare work when I was at McKinsey. And I would just wish I was in the middle of it to learn about how different medical institutions, whether it's just individual doctors or pharmaceutical companies doing drug discovery or hospitals in terms of protocols, how they are beginning to harness AI. And I guess as a layman, the thing that excites me most is the potential to rapidly accelerate drug discovery. The ability to use AI to run through thousands, maybe millions of possible scenarios and outcomes with different types of molecules and be able to separate out the more likely from the less likely using AI early on in the process so that money, resources, scientists are not spending time on something we now might know is not going to be as fruitful as some other endeavor. That just strikes me as so powerful.
No doubt.
I just want to say how grateful I am to so many people out there, organizations like yours and the work you do. We always thank our doctors because we interact with them, the nurses who sometimes are even more valuable. But we sometimes forget the thousands, tens of thousands of people behind the scenes, the bench scientists, the financiers who support these biotech companies doing, novel work that may never pay off. We only read about the great successes, but there's lots of failures. But without those failures, there aren't the successes. And every time a cancer patient walks into the doctor's office, you've just got to be grateful for the doctors, but all the people in the the NIH world, in the medical research centers at universities, at the biotech companies, at the pharma companies, the mathematicians behind that, the computer scientists. I feel just incredibly grateful to them and to be alive thanks to them in this era.
So well said, and thank you very much for saying it quite like that. Again, can't thank you enough. Hope you have a great day, and thanks again for being part of this special podcast, Believe in Progress.
Thanks for the opportunity, Mitch.
Larry shows us how strategic thinking, when paired with compassion, can create meaningful change in the fight against cancer. To our listeners, thank you for being part of the Believe in Progress community. Your curiosity, compassion, and commitment are what fuel this movement. If you've been inspired by today's conversation, consider how your own experience can help reimagine what's possible in cancer research and accelerate progress in the fight against all cancers. Donate to the AACR Foundation at aacr.org to support life-saving science. Subscribe to Believe in Progress wherever you listen to podcasts. And Larry, thank you for your vision, your impact, and your ongoing support. And remember, everybody, cancer research saves lives.